maritime mode of transport contributes about 3% globally. It might look small, but it is very clear transportation is one of the most difficult, most challenging sectors to decarbonize. So the issue of GHG abatement is an extremely major challenge, and the industry, both aviation and the maritime industry, are applying their minds. I must say that in my little research, IMO has done a great job in setting out the priorities towards decarbonization and having, this transition acted upon properly by all stakeholders. And Singapore, of course, through Maritime Port Authority, has organized an advisory panel to drive this coordination. And the setting up the Maritime Decarbonization Center is one result of this stakeholder collaboration. I will now like to invite Dr. Sanjay from the Singapore Maritime Decarbonization Center to kick off the perspective of the Maritime Decarbonization Center on the subject of maritime decarbonization. Dr. Sanjay.
Thank you very much, Kamjit. Let me just share my slide. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, one and all. Thank you for making time for this event and webinar, and I hope it will be useful for all of you. Okay, so who are we? So we were set up really as part of an effort by MPA to take hold of this challenging effort around maritime decarbonization after IMO had set up its 2030 and 2050 goals in 2018. So in 2020, MPA established an international advisory panel on maritime decarbonization. And in a year, they cranked out what we call the 9x4 recommendations to the government of Singapore. And in April, it was announced that the Global Maritime Center would be set up. So in August this year, we were actually set up. In fact, it's just so August 1st is the official date. And since then, we established our mission to really help the maritime industry eliminate GHG emissions by shaping standards, deploying solutions, financing projects, and fostering collaboration. And these were chosen purposefully. So we're not a standards organization, but what we hope to do is really through the projects and identification of gaps in the standards standard space to help shape those standards. GCMD is represented on the cryogenic and non-cryogenic committees under the Standards Development Office here in Singapore. And we believe that by using and deploying solutions, we can actually be able to help address the gaps in those standards. And that's what we are doing. And the reason why we can deploy solutions is our founding partners and recently Hapag-Lloyd and BP Shipping came aboard to actually give us funding to fund these projects across the board. We believe in fostering collaboration, and therefore you can see that we've signed a number of partnerships over the last 10 months. Both in terms of knowledge partners, coalition partners through the Trade Association, impact partners with Chevron and BCG, and we also have project partners, which are reflected based on the projects that we run. So our general philosophy is this: let not great be the enemy of good. So really doing what we can in the near term short, midterm, and long term. So this is how we think through projects. So we're not waiting for the perfect solution, but what can we do now with what we have so that the burden on the environment is actually reduced? So we give the environment, Mother Nature, a bit of runway to allow us to ramp up the production and scale of green fuels and green solutions. As you know, there are quite a number of solutions available to us, and they are essentially in three different categories: the alternative fuels, the technical and operational measures, and market-based solutions. All these solutions will deliver some level of energy efficiency and some level of GHG emission reduction, but they're all not the same and have different issues that we need to handle, not unsurmountable from an engineer's perspective, but for us to recognize that if we are going to decarbonize the pathway, we need to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each of these solutions. So this gives you a sense of the carbon abatement potential or GHG emission reduction potential of these solutions. And you can see for majority of the technical measures, they sit below 10% on its own. It doesn't discount the fact that we could do what you call a combinatorial retrofits on vessels to get more energy efficiency. But we need to actually demonstrate some of these combinatorial effects. But the big ticket items really is around using alternative energy resources. Wind power has potential, but it's also depending on the route. So you need to be actually sailing that route. If you're not sailing a route which has wind, then having the wind power installations would give you less impact than more. Slow steaming is, whilst is an easy fix, is normally subjected to scheduling and commercial reasons. So that's an area that varies its impact based on how often they actually slow steam. And when you look at alternative fuels, all alternative fuels are not the same. They all have very different GHG emission profiles from a life cycle analysis perspective. This was taken from a report by the Maritime Energies and Sustainable Development Center of Excellence at NTU in a report that they put out, the alternative fuels for international shipping. And you can see from a well to propeller, which is the LCA method, a lot of these fuels have actually very different carbon footprints. And this is very important to understand when we start investing in infrastructure and to deliver as a bunker fuel for the shipping industry. Because for some fuels, the impact might be lesser. But if we take the philosophy of bending the curve as soon as possible, then we must also consider interoperability of infrastructure that is put in. Case, for example, if you already have LNG infrastructure in place, you're bending the curve to a certain degree. But if the infrastructure can be later used for bio-LNG, then the barrier to entry for bio-LNG becomes lower, and then you can get a cumulative effect over time. So this is the way we need to start thinking holistically about how we approach the different fuel types. We anticipate that the ports around the world will be have to adopt a multi-fuel strategy to make sure it caters to the different needs and profiles of different vessels coming to its port, meaning in terms of distance it needs to travel and when it needs to refuel primarily. So when we start thinking of alternative fuels, fuel property and fuel supply are only one of many things we need to think about. And this is what we do at the GCMD. We take a holistic approach in thinking through all the different barriers to entry for a particular new fuel. from the fuel property itself, its hazard classification, whether it's available around the world, and also how do the supply chains are strung together so that to make the fuel available, the infrastructure, whether we can actually reuse existing infrastructure. So the interoperability factor is very important for low barrier to entry, or we have to invest in new infrastructure that kind of delays the adoption of some of these fuels. We also need to recognize that while some of these fuels are moved as a commodity, when it comes to bunkering, the standards need to be tighter because there's greater frequency of handling and across different stakeholders. So we need to start thinking about standards around handling, custody, transfer, and even the testing of the fuel in the labs, the way they are actually sampled, put into the right containers, and then brought to the lab for testing. These things need to be thought through when you start thinking of the fuel properties, especially around the hazards. Commercial terms become also very important in terms of the price premium and how much of it is bearable, both by the shipping industry, but also by consumers if the burden is to be shared. The insurance industry also needs to come up to speed to recognize the risk involved, and therefore are there the right instruments to be applied for these fuels or these technologies when they are deployed on these vessels. Compliance varies around the world. There's geographical regulations like ECA regions, and there's also sectoral compliance. That means within the maritime sector compared to others. So these need to also be considered. And when we start looking at data management with the increased digitalization, what is the right data? How do you string the data? How do you secure the data? And does it open doors to cyber attacks? These systems need to be thought through as well when we bring the solution together. And the last thing is on manpower. And are they ready and trained with the right competency levels to handle both the new technologies on board and also the new fuels on board, recognizing that they're all not the same in terms of their hazard materials classification. So the readiness of the manpower and the competency involved in getting them trained on the right framework will enable the right transition for these fuels. So when you pack all these things together, you realize that the government and industry must complement enabling efforts to ensure effective deployment of decarbonization solutions. There are government-led enablers that center around policy, risk management, and manpower development. And these items under each of the responsibility of the government needs to come together with the industry-led enablers. And the industry is just not the ship itself, but we will have to look at the energy converters, supply chain assets, and even the sensors and ICT backbones that is required. But in terms of risk management, is really about discipline adoption around operation standards and manpower training. And finance is something to be thought about. So here in the industry, it's the whole industry, right? How the banks, insurance companies, and even within each consumer buyer of goods and services and raw materials, do they have green procurement policies in place that would have a ripple effect across the industry to get everyone involved with decarbonization, and just not the maritime sector per se, but the entire ecosystem needs to come on board to share that responsibility. I think when we get these two enablers together, then we really can start seeing the adoption of decarbonized solutions, whether they are technical measures, operational measures, or market-based measures. So I was asked to share a bit about ammonia bunkering and safety study that we are running today. The really is around defining the safety and operation envelopes to enable ammonia bunkering. GCMD focuses on pilots and demonstrations. We're less so on the 2D, we are more so on the 3D. So when we decided that we're going to have to look at ammonia as a potential bunker fuel in the future, we thought, where could we actually demonstrate and pilot ammonia bunkering? And we said, Singapore is a good candidate, not only because we're located in Singapore, but Singapore is a good candidate for multiple reasons. One, it's a very crowded space with 1,000 vessels in the port water. It has a long coastline with communities with potentially could be at risk, and it has a long coastline of multiple economic activities around the port area. So if in this constrained environment, if we are able to demonstrate ammonia bunkering safely, with then we know that that procedure could be actually applied to many ports around the world with less constrained scenarios. So therefore, we commissioned this study, and it was a tender that DNV, Sabana Jurong, and Singapore Maritime Academy won. And the expected outcomes is really to identify and make recommendations to address the regulatory gap. So we work with the regulators to make sure we understand what they want to be addressed so that we can actually address it in a study. Is to recommend up to 2 sites. We will develop a draft technical guideline procedure for your technical reference, submission to the standards organization. They will develop a generic CAPEX model for ammonia bunkering infrastructure that will be shared with the general industry. And we're developing competency standards for bunkering operations, which the Singapore Maritime Academy then will operationalize, and seafarers and bunker operators can send for training so that they are up to speed and ready to execute. So the idea is really to then take the study and present it to the regulators to request for a regulatory sandbox to execute the pilot, which we hope to be done in early 2024. Having MPA on board as our partner allows us, as a non-profit organization with and a very neutral position, as we don't have any direct stake in any of these solutions, to be able to use MPA and MPA's ability to be not so much accelerator, but an expander of that information through these networks at IMO, the Future Fuels Port Network, and the port authorities around table. They also help us to engage with the local regulators, and we hope going forward, I mean, we're only 10 months old, as we get to know more port authorities, they will also help us engage with the regulators, especially when we do projects in other places. GCMD is not bound to do projects only in Singapore, and we can fund projects outside Singapore. So these are the study partners that we have pulled together across the ecosystem, as you can see. So there are 21 study partners. They all came on board pro bono, and I'm really glad to say when we reached out to them, all of them had a almost resounding yes, they will support this initiative, which was very heartening. Which means they recognize the importance of establishing a robust safety guidelines and operations paradigms, so that the ammonia can be considered as a viable low or zero carbon fuel. So all of them have been engaged on a weekly basis with the study partnership consultants, and this is an ongoing project. For those of you out there who would like to know more, you can go to the GCMD website and join the ICAP, which is Industry Consultation Alignment Panel. And when the information is ready to be shared, to get your input so that we can have a more complete and robust recommendation to the regulators here in Singapore. The other thing we are looking at is the drop-in green fuels assurance framework. Since 2016, there have been more than 20 biofuel trials run by various shipping companies looking at the compatibility of biofuels at different concentrations on their engine performance, and also understanding the onboard storage conditions. Why isn't it moving faster? And after much conversation and reviewing a lot of the reports and talking to almost all the trial executors since 2016, the confidence level on the supply chain of this fuel is rather low, and therefore we realize that there must be an assurance framework when we start thinking of drop-in green fuels. Drop-in green fuels means that because they're not at scale, we anticipate that there'll be commingling of green fuels with non-green fuels going forward, and to ensure to create a framework that assures both its quality, quantity, and carbon abatement potential will be key, especially as mechanisms like the carbon tax comes in, or even if people can work out the carbon credits, and also the CII. So this assurance framework is important to make sure that if the shipping industry does use drop-in green fuels, then we would need to have something that can be used as to standardize across the globe. So this is what we are working on in our next project. Some announcements should happen sometime in July this year, if not no later than August. And we're working through the details at the moment. We are also looking at route-based pilots involving port pairs through this assurance framework, and the more information would be announced. At the moment, we have 13 ship owners, operators who are committed to join this project. And we have a lot of other partners that to enable the entire project to go forward. More details we released in July. So that's it, and I hope that was useful, just to give you a snapshot of where we are from the GCMD. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sanjay. Thank you very much, Sanjay, for the comprehensive overview of the entire supply chain for the maritime decarbonization. More importantly, the collaboration that we have outlined between government, industry, and also on the technical decarbonization processes, which are highly complex. And we're just seeing the beginning of this initiative. Thank you. Siukit, can you come on board, please?
Yes, Kamjit, I'm here. Let me bring, can you see my deck?
Not, yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. It's not running. Okay, good. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to join the panel today. I'm relatively new to the maritime industry. I was in the aviation industry for almost 30 years. So I just joined Singapore Cruise Center September last year, and it's my delight to present this deck to you. I'm still very newbie in this area, but you know, through the research for this particular panel, I've learned a fair bit about sustainability and about decarbonization in the maritime space. So today I will cover mainly the maritime passenger sector, which is actually a very small cousin of the whole Singapore maritime setup, right? So everyone heard about PSA, everyone heard about sea freight and all the stuff. So we are into the passenger side of things, and we are very similar to that of the aviation airport setup in a sense, right? And today, quickly, I will run through three main topics covering the maritime passenger and more about Singapore Cruise Center, and also hopefully can bring up some practices of ferry cruise ships adopting green, how they decarbonize and how they basically support the green movements on board cruise ships. And lastly, I will talk about some challenges that industry and us will be facing or are facing when we try to adopt green. So about the Singapore maritime passenger industry, there are actually two sub-sectors here. First of all, we have the ferry services and we have the cruise ships. And there are two local regulators, right? The first regulator is MPA. So they regulate non-cruise ships sailing into Singapore. So ferry services is actually one of those areas. The other one is Singapore Tourism Board. They are the economic regulator for cruise ships coming into Singapore. There are two cruise centers in Singapore. One is the Singapore Cruise Center. We were the original cruise center that was basically set up in probably quite a number of years ago under PSA. And then the latest one at the Marina Bay Cruise Center, that is actually run by SATS Cruel JV. For the cruise ship, right? If you have not gone on a cruise ship, the cruise ships are actually growing larger and larger, right? So today, in the first cruise ship to make a call at the Singapore Cruise Center could be of the Empress class, right, or the Visual class, right? Probably that is less than 1,000 packs. But today, in the world, we are seeing the overseas class that can actually host up to 6,000 packs and 1,000 plus crew on board a cruise ship. Quantum class is the one that is currently home porting at Marina Bay Cruise Center. So they are basically hosting about 4,000 packs with 1,000 plus crew on board as well. So you can see the cruise liners are actually growing bigger. In fact, about almost 2/3 of the new modern passenger cruise ships are being built in such a large size, with only about 1/3 of capacity less than 2,000. Okay. And in terms of the ferry, we have two types of ferry vessels. One is the high-speed craft, already using some form of green fuel, and a non-high-speed craft, right? So this is what you can see here is the Majestic class, and this is from Batam Fast, right? So that is basically a quick introduction on the maritime passenger industry global. In terms of Singapore Cruise Center, something about us, our vision is to be the world's leading cruise and ferry terminal operator. We actually started under PSA and over time become autonomous, and we are now part of the Tree group. And our mission is actually to provide efficient, innovative, safe, hygienic, and green cruise and ferry terminal services. So we operate 3 ferry and 1 cruise terminals in Singapore. So we have 3 ferry terminals in Tanah Merah, in Harbourfront. Good news is that we have just reopened Harbourfront yesterday, and now we are seeing traffic coming back. Traffic to Batam Bintam and hopefully pretty soon Dasaru are coming through Harbourfront. And the last one is Pasir Panjang, which is more or less a domestic ferry terminal servicing staff going to the Bukom Islands and so on. So here you can see a little map on the types of ferry services that actually run from Tanah Merah and our Harbourfront Centre into Batam Bintam and so on and so forth. Now I want to talk about cruise ship, right? And this is basically the world's greenest cruise ship. This is basically for the Peace group, right? I will share a short video with you to see where this cruise ship is going towards in terms of adoption of technology. Just give me a minute. Hopefully that gave you a glance on future cruise ship. This eco ship was supposed to be launched in 2020, if not wrong, but because of COVID, the launch has been delayed. We can see this is a quite interesting concept of using wind, solar energy, and so on and so forth, right, to drive the cruise ship forward. And the shape is like a dolphin, right? The head you can see is like the head of a dolphin, or rather a whale, big whale. Okay. Now, quickly running through basically how the ferry and cruise ships of the world are adopting green. Here in Singapore, of course, you know, sorry, yeah, just give me a minute. Sorry, all right, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you well.
Yeah, sorry, just now the video overran. Okay, so in terms of the ferry crafts, today the fleet of ferry vessels coming from Batam, Bintan, and all the stuff, you know, opinion that hybrid of green and fossil energy is a better option for now. But MPS desire is basically to electrify the whole Singapore fleet to run on electricity or net zero fuels by 2050. So in fact, yeah, sorry.
Your presentation is not on.
My presentation on. Okay, let me share again. Can you see?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, can you see? I'm at ferry cruise ships adopting
Yes.
green. Yeah,
Yes,
okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, apologies for that. So I will say MPS desire is to electrify the Singapore's hovercraft with the whole fleet to run electricity or net zero fuel by 2050. And there was a setup of this Coastal Sustainability Alliance, 7 entities. They will build a network of stationary and mobile wireless electric chargers along the Singapore's coast, and also remodel used batteries from electric cars for use by ships to prevent wastage. Basically, this is the plan by the Alliance to repurpose expired leaf boats to give them a new lease of life as multi-purpose platforms. This will be very interesting on how they will be deployed, you know, along the Singapore coast, so that we have charging points along the coast for ships and ferry crafts, right? And they plan to have the trial as early as 2024 or 2025, targeting a 50% reduction in hovercraft's carbon emission by 2030. The picture that you see here is actually the electric ferry, Island, making regular runs in August 19, basically to show that the adoption of electric shipping is possible for ferry crafts. Now, moving on to the cruise ships. The cruise ships are actually taking on quite big initiative on themselves to basically help with the decarbonization effort. They are already on LNG powered propulsion, and they also adopting other initiatives. For example, plugging into shore power when in port, right? So they don't have to run the engine unnecessary. They also implemented onboard energy saving initiatives like having lights and air conditioning, you know, off during certain period of time and so on. And also very important is that have these zero discharge policies on waste. That means they don't emit or discharge waste into the open sea in a way to help this whole green effect, or reduction, elimination of single-use plastics on board. Right, this will also to a certain extent, you know, reduce the carbon footprint and so forth from the disposal of such plastics. Other new initiative, but not limited to, basically it's all about measuring and monitoring to ensure compliance, exploring newer types of fuel like methanol, and very important is developing sound technical standards for all to follow, right? For example, methanol buckling technical references, promoting joint collaborative efforts, so all come together in industry to work as one, and conducting independent risk review of all green technology systems and use of plastics on board. And lastly, training and sharing of best practices across the ecosystem. So this basically involved the whole ecosystem, involved all the cruise liners and all stuff in a concerted and collaborative effort to support the whole decarbonization sustainability initiative for the cruise ship industry. Okay, so these are some of the examples, real life examples. For example, just I talk about the consortium of 7 entities. So Keppel leading the Singapore Electric Vessel Drive. And also this is where Royal Caribbean, one of the largest owner of a cruise ship or cruise liners, they also kind of like defined a cruise ship of the future, right? You can see here in this infographic what our fuel they use and what else they want to implement on board, in port and so forth to basically support a green environment. This is Royal Caribbean group introducing industry's first hybrid cruise ship. So this is probably 2023, right? So using a combination of power sources, not only one. So they're looking at batteries, right? They're looking at a fuel cell system based on hydrogen and also LNG. And on top of that, they are also focusing on additional energy efficiency initiatives so that you can consume less fuel or power or energy, right? Waste energy system, shore power, just like I mentioned about it. So you power from ground services, in ports and all the stuff without having to turn on the engine. And lastly, they actually produce a lot of heat. So now how do we convert heat back into energy that can be used, to elsewhere to run probably steam irons in the ship itself, or facilitate cooking or whatever it is, right? So basically, is the target to be the first cruise ship to remove the local emissions while at a port. Okay. So lastly, I want to touch about our industry key challenges. Basically is that like airports, we have suffered significantly because of the closure of borders. We cannot transport passengers to Indonesia or to Singapore because of border closure. So we have suffered significantly in the last 2 years. It's now probably in a survival mode. So the private ferry operators are commercially driven, and with business just resuming, focus will be on survival. So I think the plea from the maritime PAX industry is basically about availability of public financial incentive, funding and loans, just like what Dr. Sanjay has mentioned just now about green funding, and also access to cost-effective infrastructure and data for visibility analytics. I think this is very key, right? The consortium is trying to deploy all these charging points along the Singapore coast, so this will help. At the same time, basically, is that all must share data so that we can actually measure, how effective, how efficient in terms of our decarbonization effort. And lastly, we talk about standardization and maturity of technology and solution, right? So rather than have multiple standards, if we can have probably 1 or 2 standards upon which the whole world is going to adopt, and the solution technology is tested and proven and deployed worldwide following a particular standard, I think that will help a lot for the industry, right? So with that, I have come to the end of my presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sukrit. Thank you very much for giving us a perspective of what's happening in regard to our ferry services as well as the bigger cruise ship terminals and cruise ship operators in regard to the progress they're making. Modest it might seem, but certainly the right direction of moving towards more sustainable and greener local shipping environment. It's my pleasure now to invite Mr. Goh Chung Han, who is the General Manager Fleet in our National Shipping Line, PIL. Over to you, Chung Han.
Thank you, Kamjit, and thank you, CILT, for having me today. Let me share my screen now. Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen. Yeah, like what Kamjit mentioned, my name is Chung Han. I'm a General Manager in the Fleet Division in Pacific International Lines, PIL. I'm in charge of the ship management arm of PIL. Today I will try to give a perspective, a view about maritime decarbonization from the lens of a ship owner and operator. PIL currently owns and operates about 98 ships, mainly container ships, which trades globally around the world. Now, to put things into context, shipping contributes about 2.5 to 3% of carbon emission globally, but at the same time carries about 85 to 90% of goods. However, shipping has traditionally been behind the curve a little bit in terms of technology compared to aviation or land-based transport. So there is scope, there is a lot of room where shipping can develop, progress, and reduce carbon emission. So I believe most of you may be aware, but nevertheless, I will just go through the regulatory requirements that the ship owner and ship operator has to comply with regards to reduction of greenhouse gas emission. Now, from the IMO side, the International Maritime Organization, a strategy, an initial IMO strategy has been spelled out in 2018. And in that strategy, it is mentioned that the ambition is to reduce carbon emission by intensity, in terms of intensity, by 40% in 2030, compared to the 2008 baseline. And in 2050, to reduce the emission by 50% in absolute terms, again, compared to the 2008 baseline. Now, this was the initial strategy. IMO is under pressure, or was under pressure, and still is, to decarbonize shipping, to come up with ambitious goals to decarbonize shipping, because at the end of the day, IMO is a UN agency, and if the shipping industry itself cannot be ambitious enough and cannot achieve decarbonization goals, then the goals might be dictated to the industry instead. You know, we have the Paris Agreement, the 1.5 degrees or not more than 1.5 degrees rise in temperature, and etc. So now what happens is that there will be a revised or what we call a final strategy by 2023. Now, time is very short. We are already in the mid of 2022. And at the recently concluded MEPC 78, there's the Marine Environmental Protection Committee meeting held at the IMO. The final details of the ambition that will be in the revised IMO strategy in 2023 has still not really been spelled out yet. There is still a lot of debate to go. And however, by second quarter of next year, that is 2023, expected to be in MEPC 18, we need to have a revised IMO strategy. Now, this is the regulatory part. From a ship owner's point of view, we monitor this closely because it will affect how we operate our ships and what kind of ships we build, what kind of ships we buy from the market, or whether we keep our existing ships, because all the ships that we operate need to comply with the regulatory requirements. Now, at this point, perhaps I will mention again from the ship owner's perspective, when it comes to decarbonization, there are three angles which nudge a ship owner or ship operator. One is what we see on the screen now. There's the regulatory requirement. Another one is the commercial requirement, which I'll touch on in the next slide. There is the expectation from the shippers, the clients, the charterers. And of course, the third one is the company itself. What is our own ambition? How do we, what are our sustainability goals? How do we wish to contribute in addressing climate change? So in this slide, I will elaborate a little bit further on the regulatory requirements before I go to the commercial pressure. When it comes to carbon reduction of carbon emission, it falls under the MAPO Convention, there's a Marine Pollution Convention, and under Annex 6, which regulates air emission. There is the EEXI, Energy Efficiency Index, for ships. That means all ships by the first survey in 2023, next year, coming very soon, has to be compliant in terms of design. For existing ships, for new ships, of course, it's straightforward. They have to be delivered in a compliant design. For existing ship, they will be surveyed, and it is estimated that probably 60 to 70% of existing ship might not meet this requirement. And however, they can be made to meet the requirement, and there are various means to do so. Of course, you can send a ship to the shipyard and tear her apart and modify the ship so that the ship can use alternate fuel or be equipped with some advanced technology. But the majority of ships will instead go down the route of limiting the engine power. They call it the engine power limitation, so that the ship will be prohibited mechanically to be ramped up to run at very high speed, where that is the point where a ship becomes a fuel guzzler. And the more fuel you consume, of course, the more carbon you emit. So that is in terms of ship design. It's a one-off in 2023. Ships will have to comply. Now, it doesn't stop there. From there onwards, we have the carbon intensity indicator, and this affects how a ship is operated, because it's basically the amount of fuel consumed multiplied by the carbon emission factor. So it translates into the amount of carbon being emitted against the transport work that is carried out. That means it translates into the efficiency of the ship. Yeah, and there is a benchmark for every ship type and size to meet, and the benchmark gets tighter and tighter year on year. So there is this continuous improvement approach when it comes to the fuel efficiency of a ship's operation. So these are the regulatory requirements. I will move on to the next slide. Now, aside from the regulatory requirements, from a ship owner or ship operator's perspective as well, there is growing expectations commercially from shippers, from charterers, yeah, even from banks and finance institutions, which provide financing for the ships, that a ship owner and ship operator should do its part in terms of addressing climate change. So there are various pathways that a ship owner or ship operator can go down, and they are not exclusive to each other. It can be a combination of the various pathways. One is, of course, what we see right in the middle of the slide. There is ship technology improvements, the adoption of various technical measures that you can install this equipment, that equipment, that can help in the fuel efficiency of the ship. However, as of today, the existing with high technology readiness level options, it goes to about probably between 5 to 10%. So there's still some way to go to even get close to the targets that have been set by IMO. So technology improvements options are there, but still not enough. There is, of course, what we see on the left side of the screen, Greenfield Drive. Now this is the likely better option. It is the use of low carbon or even one day zero carbon fuel to propel the ship. Today, the most pragmatic one is, of course, you might hear about it, LNG. In terms of maturity for supply infrastructure and availability of engine and tank containment system, it is already there. It is capable of reducing carbon emission by between 15 to 20%. And then, of course, we hear a lot about methanol, ammonia, hydrogen, and these are the next alternate fuel options that are coming up in the horizon. Now, apart from ship technology and also alternate low carbon or zero carbon fuel, we have the market-based measure that's on the right. Market-based measure as in a carbon offsets or bunker levy. Now, it depends on your perspective. There's a lot of debate on this. Some say that this is an option about pay to pollute. The ships still continue to emit carbon or pollute, but the ship operator can purchase these offsets credits. But if you look at it the other way around, it might be an impetus to level up the playing field between the conventional fuel now and the alternate low carbon fuel. So it makes it, it tries to narrow the gap between the cost difference, and it also serves as a push for ship owners and ship operators to go more green. Yeah. And of course, in terms of bunker levy and all that, the concept is that the monies that are collected will be funded for R&D research for shipping decarbonization. Now, next, so the options that a ship owner or ship operator have at this point in time, I will not go through each and every one of them, but in detail. But suffice to say, these are the options that are commonly on the table at this point in time. Of course, hopefully somewhere down the road in the very near future, some kid somewhere around the world will find the holy grail of zero carbon fuel that is safe and easily available and feasible to be used on existing ships engines. But until that day, these are the options that we have on the table. You know, the pragmatic solution at the moment, like what I mentioned just now, there is the dual fuel LNG, which gives a carbon reduction of 15 to 20%, but that has the potential of developing further as time goes on with green and blue LNG, you know, bio or synthetic means. If it's synthetic, I shouldn't use the word LNG. It's not natural. It's we can call it synthetic e-methane or synthetic methane. There is ammonia. There's methanol. There's also the technology of carbon capture, which exists today, land-based. There are many companies, many startups looking into making it feasible and possible for ships. I think technology-wise, personally, I'm confident it works. It is just the logistics behind of what to do with the captured carbon. How do you discharge it or land it ashore? And how do we go about that? There's fuel cell and hydrogen, battery, energy storage system. Of course, this is feasible for, excuse me. This is feasible for small ships, harbor crafts and all that because of the weight and the storage capacity of a battery at this point in time. To have this option and power a ship across the Pacific Ocean, we still need to see some technological advancement and breakthrough. And biofuels. Now, biofuels is is very much looked into by ship owners and ship operators, PIL included. We did a trial recently, and we are also working with GCMD on further possible trials, etc. As a drop-in solution, especially for existing ship. However, there are some challenges. At the IMO now, the methodology of calculating the carbon factor is from tank to wake. And if it is just tank to wake, in terms of calculation, biofuel does not have the carbon reduction. It is only when it is well to wake, the whole life cycle analysis consideration, then the feasibility of biofuel as a low carbon fuel comes into play. Yeah, but it is an option, and hopefully it will develop further, and it becomes feasible as a drop-in solution for existing ships. Now, I take an example of PIL's own experience on how we come to adopt LNG, greener marine fuel, moving from the conventional fuel oil. I mentioned that because PIL, we have put in new building orders for LNG dual fuel ships. Now, what we have to look at is in terms of the cost of the new ship, CapEx. Of course, it is higher than what it would cost to build a conventional fuel ships. OPEX, the operational cost when the ship is finally delivered, the expected or the forecasted price of LNG fuel compared to fuel oil, and in terms of supply, the availability of supply, where the ship runs, and where the bunker facilities are available. In terms of suppliers, the partners that are there, that will be able to work with us to ensure availability. The below are just some of the considerations that we take into when we assess the type of fuel that we want to adopt. And when it comes to LNG, like I mentioned before, the supply and the bunkering is quite unique. There are certain terminals in the world that have the availability of LNG bunkering. And in those terminals as well, where LNG bunkering is available, there are also, at this point in time, limited number of LNG bunker vessel. So we actually have to look into that, the locations where our ships are likely to trade, the availability of LNG bunkers, and the number of LNG bunker vessels as well. And because the LNG bunker vessel itself is of course more costly than conventional fuel oil bunker vessel. So it requires investment by the related parties, bunker suppliers, and the oil majors that are involved in this. Yeah. Now, as what I mentioned just now, taking LNG as an example again, it provides a 15 to 20% reduction in carbon emission, and that will not go that far. When you, as a ship owner, when we build a ship, normally we will depreciate the ship over 25 years. So a ship is expected to have about 25 years lifespan. And 25 years from today will go to 2047, very near to the 2050 target of IMO. And the 2050 target will be revised next year in 2023. And for all we know, it can be instead of 50% reduction, it will be something like net zero or something by 2050. So it can be a very ambitious target. So as a ship owner, we need to be prepared. So even when we adopt a solution, for example, we adopt an alternative fuel solution for our new build ships, we also have to consider, is there a chance that this solution can lead us to further options where more reduction in carbon emission is possible, without having to tear the ship apart, change the engine, change the fuel tank. So in terms of LNG, there is theoretically, there is the possibility of bio LNG and synthetic. Again, I should not call it LNG. It's not natural, synthetic. It should be e-methane or or synthetic methane. So these are the pathways, potential pathways, and the possibility that we look at. Of course, there are other alternative low carbon fuel as well today that people are looking at, ammonia, methanol, etc. Yeah. Now, I mentioned about biofuel just now. So we have, as a company, PIL, we have carried out trials on one of our ships with biofuel using from the source of used cooking oil, Ecomi. The trials went well. So technically, we are quite confident. It is a matter of the life cycle analysis and the calculation, the methodology of calculation for correction factor. But again, we have to bear in mind, we are talking about blue water shipping, ships that trade globally. If it is feasible as a drop-in fuel for PIL, it is feasible as a drop-in fuel for other ship owners and ship operators as well. And the demand will be, well, definitely the demand will be more than whatever used cooking oil there is in this world. So we have to consider other sources of biofuel. And we are working with various parties and like what I mentioned just now with GCMB as well to look into the feasibility of this pathway. Yeah. And we have to bear in mind the life cycle analysis, which I mentioned just now. So we have to be careful that the option is actually green in a life cycle scenario. That means the production and all that, because if you need to clear a lot of land and all that, then it might not be very green. And if you are using a source of energy in the production that is not really green, for example, it comes from a coal power plant, then the consideration is different. Yeah. Lastly, I have 2 slides on this one. I'll go through quite fast. This is on the market-based measures. Now the two main market-based measures being considered at this point in time is, one is the simpler one, which is a levy being imposed on the fuel that is consumed, the fuel oil, or whichever fuel, depending on the carbon content. Then the amount of levy is to be imposed. The other one is cap and trade system, carbon credits, or you can call it emission trading scheme, etc. So these are the 2 pathways. There are pros and cons. One is simpler, the levy is simpler, but you know it also provides some certainty to the shipping industry, ship owners and ship operators. We know exactly if we buy 1 ton of fuel and how much the quantum, the levy that we need to pay. But there is a lot of debate at the IMO if such a system is being put in place, how is the collected funds being used? How is it being distributed? Yeah, and then of course there are various perspectives, various views, and to whether market-based measure is the way to go, or it will cause increase in cost, in transportation costs, without really reducing carbon emission. Now, cap and trade system is a different perspective as well. Some of you might be aware there are different regions in the world which are now pondering and considering seriously imposing emission trading scheme or carbon tax, even on ships. And this brings another whole different ballgame into the scenario, because it becomes more complex. It becomes a regionally imposed requirements. And for global industry like shipping, where a ship can actually sail from China all the way to Europe, and certain legs are being subjected to carbon tax and certain lakes are not, it becomes very complex, and it also causes an uneven playing field. You know, you might have ship owners operating as the similar ships but in different regions without being subjected to such carbon tax, and while other ship owners operating a similar size, type, age of ship in a certain region and has to be subjected to carbon tax, etc. And the money is collected if it goes to regional scheme. Then the money is collected in that area, goes to the development of R&D in that area. So it is more complex, but it is being looked at. I'm just sharing what is being debated and discussed at this point in time. Again, as a ship owner, we have to monitor all this very closely, because in the absence of technology breakthrough and breakthrough in terms of zero carbon fuel in the very near future.
Chongkan, can I get
Yeah,
your help to conclude, because I need to
okay.
control the
This
time,
is,
you don't mind.
I think this is my last slide already.
Okay.
So I will just share that.
Thank you.
In the absence of a technological breakthrough as mankind, we find a real zero carbon fuel that is safe and is easily available worldwide, the market-based measure would need to be imposed to nudge and push the industry forward. So I come to my last slide. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand it back to Karamjit. Thanks.
Thank you, Chongkan, very much for a comprehensive overview. Very interesting, because it's a global player in the maritime industry with 98 ships flying all over the world. You certainly have a very complex issue to manage from what you outlined. So I won't dwell on that more, but let me now invite Mr. Matthew Gallagher, who is the Director of Marketing of Naval. Matthew, please.
Yes, good afternoon all. Thank you very much, Richard. Team and all, and pleased, Richard, to speak with you today. Just bear with me one moment while I get the schematics. Now, you see my screen? Everything okay?
You have your, maybe the speaker
Here we
slide.
go. One moment. There we go.
Yep, all good, thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right, okay. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Gallagher. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director for Naval. We are a global freight forwarder, and I'm very pleased today, Richard, to share with you some insights into how we, as a freight forwarder, connect both the customers, but also the subcontractors, the shipping lines, the carriers, the truckers, together in our drive and commitment for sustainability in terms of logistics. So why are we doing this? I think we already know, Richard, but within Richard, the transportation sector, the drive, which are for decarbonization, is quite key, as supply chains account for over 60% of the carbon that is in the world, which is today. So it's of high importance, Richard, that we address this matter, and we start doing so today. Briefly about Naval, for those of you who don't know who we are, we're a company that's over 125 years old. We have a span which are 1,400 offices globally, so we're in every city which is in the world, every major city in the world, in 100 countries. We're the number one, and when I say number one, I mean the largest. We move around 5 million TEUs, that's containers, and we also are the largest air logistics forwarder in the world as well, with about 80,000 employees. In terms of what we do, right, we provide air, sea, road, project logistics, customs clearance and insurance globally. And we also break down and we touch with various different sectors that we specialize in: aerospace, automotive, consumer, high-tech, industrial, perishables, pharma, and healthcare. So how do we do it? We do it with our dedicated people, so our team, our employees. As I mentioned, we specialize in specific services, but also in specific industries. Again, it's delivering much of that expertise to our customers in helping them run their supply chains globally. And more important, we do it with technology, and that's a key part of our business. But one of the kind of the larger interests, and one that we're here to discuss today, is our commitment to the climate, and how we want to lessen the impact of our customers' supply chains on the environment. So for us, it's a real key pillar for us, right? And we've been doing this for a number of years now, and we've received some praise with our approach and how we are helping our customers reduce their carbon footprint in the world today. We do so. So how are we measuring this? And I think some of our colleagues, our fellow speakers on today's presentation have touched upon this. We are using the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, for Scope 1 and 2, we have 14 of the 17 SDGs which are actually covered. And again, we're doing this on a global basis. So it's reaching everywhere. So in terms of how the goals that we have necessarily set, in terms of carbon neutrality, we want to be carbon neutral by 2030. Okay, so for us, in terms of direct and indirect emissions, we're already past that milestone. The direct emissions, this is use of, say, for example, in a warehouse, for example, we are buying, and we're doing this now, which also in Singapore and in Malaysia. We are buying or purchasing solar energy. We also have solar energy. We also have solar panels on our warehouses. We use LED lighting as well. And we've also taken on, where we can, in markets where the infrastructure is there, electric vehicles. We're somewhat burdened by the lack of infrastructure in the market, particularly in Asia, but in those markets where we can, we just announced this week, both in India and also in Thailand, some electric vans which are for our customers. So again, we're purchasing the energy, renewable energy, for all of our sites. And where we eventually want to get to, which is a reduction on business travel. So during this COVID period, that has helped us all over Zoom, and we're not going back to the ways that we were, but we're also then pushing our suppliers, so the airlines and also the shipping lines, to drive forward in their product offerings around LNG, around biofuels, and sustainable aviation fuels as well. Okay. So how do we help support our customers and support the industry in achieving their CO2 goals? It's really about data. That's where it starts. What we find, is that we're seeing now, because of the Paris Agreement, and we're seeing an awful lot more asked by investors, by the regulators, and also the end customers. So with that, our customers are starting to sit up more and start to ask more, which is great. How we are helping is we're really driving this through data, through visibility. So the first step is, how do I measure or what is my actual CO2 impact today? So we have data and tools which are to be able to help our customers measure that data and measure that baseline. And then from there, we can start to look at reduction. So the reduction could be moving product from air freight to sea freight. It could be moving product from from sea freight to rail as well. It could also mean moving warehouses to near sourcing, different locations as well. So again, which are offering different solutions. And what we can and what we are doing today and what our customers are buying from us today is the CO2 offsetting and also different fuel options. So we are selling today, which are through our partners, sustainable aviation fuel, biofuel and LNG as well. Aside from that, when customers, because again, it's driven by technology, when customers are booking shipments with us online, right? So the technology element, we are offsetting the CO2 for them on their behalf for free. Okay. So yeah, so that's the conclusion which of my presentation, which is today. Again, one of my key takeaways for the audience would be very much which is that the cost of not doing this is much higher than the actual cost of the fuels and of the solutions itself. So we need to act now, and there are solutions in place today that can be taken up. And I hope which is that more and more of our customers and the market actually start to take them up as we slow which is the cause of global warming. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for the very interesting presentation. We are running short of time, so I would take some of the questions that we have already received from our audience and try to see if I can cover as many of those questions. If not, I apologize in advance. We have a question from Mr. Tim Foot, and his question is, can Southeast Asia be a green methanol producing king? Anybody want to? Sanjay, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I guess it's a question of supply and demand, and I'm sure that it's possible, but you must remember Southeast Asia's access to renewables is limited by the various geographies. So if it's going to do green methanol, it needs to really justify competing with green electrons from other sectors for it just to make green methanol. So it's really a question of economics at the end of the day.
Thank you, Sanjay. I also suspect one has to be careful because methanol could also compete and impinge adversely against the food producing kind of crops, you know, and sources of supply. And if that happens, then of course it's going to be very difficult for methanol to be the king in the sense of having a monopoly as a feedstock to produce the renewable fuels. We have another question from Mr. Chris Sung, and the question is, what will be the biggest growth area in the maritime industry in terms of sustainability? Anybody wants to try that? I think the question is a little bit hazy, but I will attempt. Now, I think the growth area, the several growth areas, because you have a transition, and as the industry transitions, as alluded by Chung An and the other speakers, you'll have to look at, you know, retrofitting your engines and certain other systems. So there are the short-term measures that will create growth areas and opportunities for this kind of technology solutions in the short term. And I'm sure they are already being rolled out, not only on ships itself, but also your infrastructure. You can have battery-powered hovercraft, then you need infrastructure and technologies come in. The ferries and the smaller boats, like Sweetwood mentioned about the electric power vessels that we already have. So these are already growth areas, as they will definitely override some of the old diesel-based vessels. And finally, of course, in a 20-25 years time, as Chung San alerted, ship owners have to make up their mind in terms of, you know, what strategic position do you take in terms of buying new ships, which are entirely geared. Of course, there has to be flexibility to be able to not over depend on one fuel, whereas LNG, ammonia. So the flexibility will mean dual fuels. So you have an opportunity for dual fuels. But the ship owners will have to come up from design all the way to operation, have a complete opportunity. So that'll be another growth area. I hope that helps to answer. But I'll be open to other views from the panel if you have.
Yeah,
Anyone?
Karamjit, maybe I can chime in.
Please, Des, go ahead.
I think he qualified that question with the word biggest. And I presume biggest would mean revenue. And if you look at total fuel demand for the maritime sector is between 200 to 300 million tons of fuel. So on a continuous basis, if you can produce a green fuel with no encumbrances and at a low cost, you could capture the market technically.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you. And indeed, you are right, because the major challenge, as you say, is cost in renewable energies. Where the aviation fuel, I've seen that the cost for sustainable aviation fuel is about 4 to 5 times the cost of conventional fossil fuel. And to the same extent, shipping will have its own cost challenges. So unless the renewable energy costs and the supply sources are able to come down, and this is where government has to come in, regulators have come in, carbon tax to accelerate the process of increasing the supply of all these renewable fuels, where the combination ammonia, LNG, and then the price will come down. With that, the growth of industry and prosperity will emerge. Let me take another question here, and this is from Dorothea Lau. Question is, how does the Port of Singapore prepare and position itself to the ASEAN Green Port in relation to sustainable fuel supplies? Are we on target in achieving the 2030 milestone? I'm afraid, Sanjay, you probably be the better one more to answer that as well.
Oh, yeah, I think I must qualify. I don't represent the Port of Singapore nor the MPA.
Sure.
So
Sure.
this is purely my impression of what's happening at this juncture. I think the first great step the authorities have done is put out a plan. So the green plan from MPA to decarbonize the sector is a very important step because it articulates the ambition. I think the second step the authorities have done to maintain Singapore's position as an international maritime center is the engagement with the various parties in other ports around the world to make sure that the supply chain of fuels, and not only just fuels, but the whole idea of digitalization, the increase in the efficient use of the vessel, connectivity, is all key to make sure that Singapore remains competitive as a competitive port within the Southeast Asian region. So I think Singapore is lucky in that sense that it has more than 5,000 different companies involved in shipping located in Singapore. So the leadership is around to kind of work and collaborate together. And I think GCMD has benefited from that energy and leadership between MPA and a number of stakeholders that have come together and basically put money where their mouth is and said, let's get things done. So I think this is where Singapore tries to stay ahead of the equation within the other ports. But that's my 2 cents. And like I said, I just want to qualify. I don't represent the government, nor any policymaker.
Thank you, Sanjay. I'm glad for clarification and hence appreciate your frank views. I think it now leaves me to sort of quickly summarize. I won't have the luxury of taking more questions as we're running be short of time, but suffice it for us to realize that as a major transshipment center, a major maritime center, a major logistics center, a major tourism center, a major trade node, global trade, the whole issue of maritime shipping is critical, not only for Singapore's own economy, but also to the regional and the world economy. We are a global port in that sense. And therefore, some of the major initiatives that Sanjay has alluded that has come from our regulators and government and the stakeholders. More importantly, for example, the infrastructure side is not just looking at the vessels, but for example, the bunkering infrastructure. I believe last year, about 24 ship-to-ship trials had taken place. So those are indications of Singapore racing ahead, trying to ensure that our readiness is there. And we are there to support the industry and all the ocean liners and so on and so forth. And I'm told now the safety study that Sanjay mentioned in his presentation, the study is on board to find out, and position ourselves in terms of the the future safety implication of ammonia in the study, because ammonia is going to be another low-hanging fruit. But the safety implications have to be understood deeply before solutions are deployed, not only and shared with other parts of the world. So with that, let me thank all the panel members. Most grateful for your insights, very interesting, very insightful. And I apologize for running out of time. And thank you very much again. And thank you for the audience for patient enough to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for the panel members, just give me a few minutes to just making sure that only us left on the screen.
Matthew accidentally logged off.
All clear? Edward?
Yes, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you very much. I think we have all the participants left or put in waiting room already. Thanks again very much, your time for sharing in a very complex subject. And I have, what I would do is I will capture all those questions and send it to you all to address. So before I hand it back to Kramjit, my personal thanks for all of you agreeing to participate and share and present at this webinar of CILT on this very, very complex and at the same time is a very, very broad transportation issue that we need to work through.
Yeah.
Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward.
Sorry
Thank
for
you
the
very
overrun.
much. I'm sorry we run short of time, but
Yeah,
you know,
I caused most of it.
it's very
Sorry.
tempting to blow the whistle, so to speak, when we're running out of time. But I realized how passionate each of the speakers were, and I had to really restrain myself. You know, so I
Yeah.
apologize if Chung-Han I had to.
No, I have to apologize. You know,
No, don't worry.
My timekeeping
I know
was
it is.
terrible.
I
But
speak
I
many
know-
of the webinars. I have the same problem. You know, we always are so excited about a subject.
Yeah,
So
this
don't worry
topic we
about
can
it. No,
talk 3 days, 2 nights, and we still cannot finish.
No, it's partly my fault because originally we had 3 speakers.
Yeah.
I was a bit ambitious. I wanted a logistic perspective. So I managed to get Matthew in the end. And that is how we end up 4 speakers. But anyway, thank you so much. Most grateful. We'll be in touch. We will be having a thank you dinner at the cricket club. So I hope we can wine and dine, and our personal way of expressing our grateful thanks to each of you. Edward will coordinate the mutually convenient date for the dinner. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you. Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you,
Bye.
Sanjay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Chung-Han.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Suket.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.